Imagine working for the government for like 35 years, you know, getting amazing performance reviews every single year. Then, bam, you're fired. And they take away all your retirement benefits, all because you signed one single piece of paper. Sounds crazy, right? Well, that's exactly what happened to Jocelyn Eleazar Monteros. She was a city accountant who got swept up in that whole Philippine fertilizer fund scam. And that's what we're going to deep dive into today, the Supreme Court decision that basically, like, flipped the script on how the Philippine legal system works.
This is one of those cases that just grabs you, because it really shows how tough it is to balance, like, holding public officials accountable while also making sure they get a fair shake.
Yeah, for sure. And to, like, really wrap our heads around it, we need to rewind back to 2004, back to the Department of Agriculture's Farm Inputs and Farm Implements program. You know, the one that was supposed to help farmers and boost agriculture. Well, the Surigao city government got some of that money. And guess what? Monteros, as the city accountant, she was the one in charge of managing those funds. And that's where things take a turn.
It all seems so normal, though, right? Like, signing disbursement vouchers, that's just part of the job for a city accountant. But in this case, that voucher that Montero signed for buying fertilizer, well, the Commission on Audit, the COA, they flagged it in 2006. They said, hold up, this purchase is way overpriced. It raised some eyebrows, made people think, something fishy going on here.
And from there, things just started to unravel. Even though the COA's first notice didn't actually name Montero specifically, it kicked off this whole chain of events, the legal battle that went on for almost 20 years. It wasn't until 2011 that the task force Abono, was part of the Office of the Ombudsman, finally filed a formal complaint. That complaint was against Monteros and a bunch of other city officials. They were accused of breaking Republic Act No. 3019, that's the Anti-Graft and Corrupt Practices Act, and also violating the uniform rules on administrative cases in the civil service.
I think it's super interesting that there was this, like, 5-year gap between when the COA first flagged the purchase and when the Ombudsman actually filed the complaint. That delay, that actually becomes a huge deal as the case makes its way through the legal system.
Oh, absolutely. That delay is key to understanding how everything went down. And, we have to remember that Monteros wasn't alone in this whole procurement process. The mayor, the treasurer, other officials, they were all involved. But for some reason, it was Monteros who ended up in the spotlight. Why was she singled out? Especially since that initial COA notice didn't even say her name.
Yeah, exactly. It's strange, right? Why focus on her? And to her credit, she was adamant that she was innocent. She said, hey, signing that voucher, that was just me doing my job like I've done 1,000 times before. She was adamant about acting in good faith, assuming everything was on the up and up as she did her job.
So we've got Monteros saying she's innocent, but she's stuck in this system where it feels like that one signature on that document sealed her fate. But let's dig into the legal stuff a little more. We've got two separate things going on here. The criminal case and the administrative case. Where do we even start to, like, untangle this web? It really does feel like that, doesn't it? Like she got sucked into this giant machine, she couldn't get out. But let's look at these legal battles themselves. So we've got those two tracks, the criminal case and then the administrative one. Let's start with the criminal case, the one that ended up in the Sandigan-Bayan, that special court that handles all those graft and corruption cases.
Right, and this is where that delay we talked about, that's where it really comes back to bite, Because the Sandigan-Bayan, they actually ended up dismissing that whole criminal case against Monteros. Why? Because the Ombudsman took forever to get things moving. We're talking years here. The court said, nope, that's not right. This violates Montero's right to a speedy trial. You can't just drag things out like that. That's a basic right in Philippine law.
Okay, so that's a win for Monteros, at least as far as the criminal case goes. But we can't forget about that other one, the administrative case. What happened with that?
Well, here's the thing. The Ombudsman. Despite those delays in the criminal case, they went ahead and found Monteros guilty. Dishonesty, grave misconduct, conduct prejudicial to the best interest of the service, the whole 9 yards. And the penalty, the worst possible dismissal from service. And they took away all of her retirement benefits, basically wiped out her entire career.
Wait, so she's cleared in the criminal case because of all those delays, but then they find her guilty in the administrative case? That doesn't make any sense.
I know, right? It does seem kind of backwards. But the Ombudsman, they argued that administrative cases are like a totally separate thing from criminal cases. They've got different rules of evidence, different procedures, the whole bit. But it does make you wonder, is that really fair to have such different outcomes like that?
Yeah, it's hard not to question the fairness of it all. So what did Monteros do? I mean, I can't imagine she just took this lying down.
Oh, you're right about that. She definitely wasn't going to go down without a fight. She appealed that decision to the Court of Appeals, hoping they'd see things her way, recognize how messed up it was, and overturn that guilty verdict.
So, did it work? Did the Court of Appeals agree with her? Did they see that problem, that discrepancy between what happened in the criminal case and then what happened in the administrative one?
Nope, sadly not. They actually sided with the Ombudsman. They said, yeah, there's enough evidence to support those administrative charges. They basically just brushed aside all her arguments about the delays and about not getting a fair chance to defend herself.
So, a tough blow for Monteros. But she's a fighter, right?
Yeah.
She didn't give up. She took her case all the way to the top, to the Supreme Court. What happened in that final round of her legal battle?
This is where things get really interesting. The Supreme Court, they actually overturned the Court of Appeals. It was a huge decision, really groundbreaking. And they did it by using this powerful legal principle. It's called stare decisis.
Stare decisis. Now, I'm no legal expert, so could you break that down for us regular folks? What does that even mean, and why was it so important in this case?
Sure. Stare decisis basically means stick to what's been decided before. It's all about precedent, you know? Courts are supposed to follow previous rulings in cases that are, like, similar. It keeps things consistent and predictable. That way, legal decisions don't seem random or unfair. So in Monteros' case, the Supreme Court, they looked back at that Sandigan-Bayon ruling, the one where they tossed out the criminal case because of those crazy delays, and then they applied that same logic to the administrative case. They basically said the ombudsman took way too long here too, and that really messed things up for Monteros. She didn't get a fair shot.
So they're saying that even though administrative cases work a little differently, you still can't drag your feet. You have to give people a fair chance to defend themselves.
Exactly. They were sending a message loud and clear. Justice delayed is justice denied. It doesn't matter if it's a criminal case or an administrative one. And here's the kicker. The Supreme Court didn't just clear Monteros' name. They ordered that she gets her job back pay, benefits, the whole shebang. And, get this, they even restored her seniority rights. Like none of this ever even happened.
Wow, what a turnaround. Talk about a victory. But I'm curious about the details. Why did they actually make that decision? Did they just use stare decisis? Or was there more to it?
Well, stare decisis was definitely a big part of it, but they also really dug into the specifics of Monteros' case. They used this thing called the balancing test, which comes from an earlier case, Kagang v. Sandigan-Bayon. That case also had to do with some serious delays. This test helps figure out if someone's right to a speedy trial was violated.
Okay, so let's break down this balancing test. What are they actually looking at when they use it in a case like this?
Right, so there are four main things they consider. First, they look at how long the delay was. In Monteros' case, the ombudsman took 5 years to make a decision in that administrative case. 5 years. The court said, whoa, that's way too long, especially for an administrative case. Remember, those have a lower standard of proof than a criminal case, and yet it took even longer than the criminal case, which was already considered way too slow.
5 years does seem like an eternity, especially for this kind of case. What's the second thing they look at?
The second thing is the reason for the delay. Was there a good excuse? And in this case, the Supreme Court said, nope, the ombudsman didn't give us any good explanation. There was no talk about it being super complicated or having tons of evidence to go through. Nothing like that. They just took their sweet time.
So not only was the delay really long, but there was no excuse for it. Sounds like the Supreme Court wasn't too happy about that. What about the third thing?
Okay, the third one focuses on whether the defendant, the person accused, actually spoke up about wanting a speedy trial. And in this case, the Supreme Court, they recognized that Monteros, she never gave up. She always said she was innocent. She kept fighting and using all her legal options. She didn't just sit back and wait.
She definitely sounds like someone who knew her rights and wasn't afraid to fight for them. So we've got that long delay, no good reason for it, and Monteros standing up for herself. What's that last part of this balancing test?
All right, the last part is all about whether the delay actually hurt the defendant. And, well, in Monteros' case, the Supreme Court, they said, absolutely, she was hurt. I mean, she lost her job, lost her retirement benefits, she went through years of stress and worry, her reputation was damaged, and then there's the financial hardship. All because of this delay. It basically turned her life upside down.
It's a good reminder that just delayed can really be justice denied. Those delays, they have real consequences. They mess up people's lives.
Yeah, for sure. And the Supreme Court, they recognized that. They pointed out that Monteros had dedicated 35 years of her life to public service, no black marks on her record, always got glowing reviews, and then, bam, she's punished. Not because she did something wrong, but because the system failed her.
It's powerful that the Supreme Court didn't just clear her name, but they also made sure she got everything back. Her job, her pay, everything. They weren't just admitting a mistake, they were actively trying to fix it.
Right. It sends a big message about due process and about how the government has to make sure things are fair. So what do you think? What does all this mean for the Philippine legal system? Does this set a precedent for other administrative cases going forward?
That's a really good question. Definitely seems like a game changer. This decision, where the Supreme Court said those speedy trial principles and due process rights apply to administrative cases, that could lead to a lot more scrutiny. People will be watching those timelines a lot closer, and I think there'll be a much bigger emphasis on making sure those proceedings are fair.
Yeah, it's like they're all connected, right? You mess up one part and it throws everything else off. And this wasn't just some abstract legal case. This was a real person's life. Her whole career was on the line.
I know. It's a good reminder that the legal system, it needs to be more than just efficient. It's got to be fair. It's got to be humane. You can't forget about the people involved.
It's been quite a journey unpacking this case. All those procedures, the appeals, trying to figure out all the laws and precedents. It's a lot to take in. So what are the big takeaways here? What should people really remember from this deep dive into the Monteros case? Oh, there's a lot to unpack here for sure. But I think one of the most important things is that idea of stare decisis. Treating similar cases in a similar way. That was huge here. That's what helps keep the legal system from being totally random. It makes things more predictable, more fair. And it helps people trust the system more.
Yeah, that makes sense. When people feel like the rules are applied fairly, they're more likely to trust the system. What else? Any other big takeaways you'd highlight?
Oh, absolutely. Another big one is that right to a speedy trial. We usually think about that with criminal cases, but the Monteros case, it shows us that it's important in those administrative cases too. The principle is the same.
Right.
You can't just let things drag on forever. That's not justice.
Yeah, it's a really important point.
Okay.
Our rights, they don't disappear just because it's a different type of case. They should be protected no matter what. Anything else? Any other key takeaways that stand out to you?
There's one more thing I think is really important, and that's this. Accountability goes both ways. We expect public officials to be accountable for what they do, right? But the government itself also has to be accountable. They have to follow the rules, treat people fairly, and make decisions in a timely manner. If we want real justice, we need a system that protects both individual rights and the integrity of the legal process.
That's a great way to put it. Justice isn't just about punishing people. It's about making sure everyone gets a fair shake. It's about protecting people from unfair treatment.
I totally agree. The Monteros case, it's a great example of that. It reminds us that we always need to be working towards a legal system that's both fair and efficient, one where people's rights are protected and justice is served without unnecessary delays.
Well, that about wraps up our deep dive into the Monteros case. We hope you found it informative and maybe even got you thinking a bit. If you did, let us know in the comments. We always love hearing from you. Share your thoughts, your favorite takeaways, anything that stuck with you. And hey, if you want more deep dives like this, hit that subscribe button. We'll be back with more fascinating legal cases and discussions that will get you thinking. Until next time, keep exploring, keep asking questions, and keep the conversation